My husband and I were in an argument, and he shot me, and then he killed himself.
A woman makes a chilling call to 911 on the worst day of her life.
I don't think I'm gonna make it. Oh my God, help me please.
The young wife and mother moans as she pleads for help, saying her husband tried to kill her.
Where did he shoot you at?
I don't know, I'm bleeding all over.
What really happened in that tiny room at the home of Janelle Bohr and her husband, Greg?
When in our combined 40 years have we ever heard of the intended target of a murder-suicide survive?
On the surface, Janelle and Greg seem to live a storybook life. Janelle worked days at the post office, Greg the third shift at a major pharmaceutical company. It was the second marriage for both. Greg's daughter Lily from his first marriage lived with them.
Lily, what do you want us to know about your dad?
He was such a good man. He was one of those really good people that's hard to come across now, it seems.
That sentiment is echoed by Greg's younger brother Chad and his wife Natalie.
He was that guy that would put down what he was doing no matter what, no matter when, and help anybody he could in any way he could.
Together, Greg and Janelle had a young son, Jason, and their combined income of $100,000 meant they could live on 12 acres in Scotts, Michigan, where they could practice their hobby. Guns. But their shared love for the Second Amendment and Greg's weapons collection wasn't all guns and roses for the rest of his family.
When he met Janelle, do you remember when she started coming around?
He introduced us to her, and we were, okay, you know, I mean, great, I'm happy that you're happy. But it didn't take long for us to see there was something off about her.
In what way?
She was very distant. She didn't really want the acceptance. She wanted Greg to herself.
They were so clingy and stuck to each other that it was kind of awkward sometimes.
They ended up eloping to Las Vegas. Janelle, the blushing bride in a white gown, Greg, the man in black.
So you didn't want Dad to marry her?
No, I didn't really like her that much at the time already because she just seemed super distant and it was strange. It very soon became that she didn't want anything to do with me and ignored me most of the time.
That must have been hell.
Yeah, it was. She wouldn't look at me or speak to me or anything. She'd walk right past me and pretend I didn't exist.
Greg's mother, Sharon, says Janelle took a scary turn once the ring was on her finger.
It seemed like after they got married and after my grandson was born, things started changing pretty rapidly. She had managed to act like a different person up to a certain point, and then look out, here came the monster.
That's what you call her?
Yes.
4 years after the wedding, Greg filed for divorce, citing a breakdown of the marriage relationship. He asked for joint custody of Jason and moved downstairs, sleeping on a mattress in what they called the gun room. But on that fateful Valentine's Day, Janelle comes home for lunch and the couple gets into an argument, one that will end their marriage forever.
Okay, where did he shoot himself at?
It looks like in his head.
Police dashcam footage shows the Kalamazoo County, Michigan deputies speeding through traffic on the highways and on the back roads to get to Janelle's remote property. As they pull up to the house at the end of the dirt driveway, Janelle is already outside waiting for them, nursing her bloody and injured arm. Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Detective Sergeant Warren Meisner was one of the first on the scene.
And I remember quickly them loading her in the ambulance and me providing that security for a victim of a murder-suicide.
I'm just gonna take some photos. Just tell them to hold off until I get some pictures.
Once inside the house, investigators take dozens of photos in the gun room. With so many guns, rifles, and ammo, it looks like an armory, and a pool of blood marks the spot where Janelle says Greg shot himself. As detectives process the crime scene, Janelle is in the ambulance on the way to the hospital in nearby Kalamazoo, consenting to a recorded interview with Sergeant Meisner.
You know where you're going?
Bronson Hospital.
Okay. You know why?
Because I got shot.
What happened today?
I just came home on my lunch break. I've been trying to beg him to not get divorced. And he's got really mad, really angry with me because I had told my attorney, I showed them pictures of my husband had been abusing our son and he'd been abusing me. He just started shooting like a whole bunch.
Accusations were flying, but Meisner was suddenly taken aback during the ride.
I was surprised right from the just asking basic biographical questions. Her calmness, her demeanor, it just struck me.
Someone just tried to kill her. She's been shot in the arm, and she's calm.
Yeah, absolutely.
The next day, from her hospital bed, Janelle gives Sergeant Meisner and his colleague a second recorded interview explaining her version of events.
I slapped him across the head with my open hand like that. He just went crazy. He grabbed the gun and shot at me.
How many times?
I don't know.
How many times do you think?
At least 2, maybe 3. He said, I'm gonna kill you for what you've done. And I assume that is for me telling my attorney and people that he abused our child. And he abused me mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I kicked it, and it fell like off to the side.
You don't look like a karate master or anything.
Yeah.
Can you explain that?
I just kicked it with my foot.
Janelle claims that's when Greg grabbed a second gun off the shelf and shot at her several times.
How about him?
I think he was in the middle of the bed.
In the middle of the bed with both feet on the bed or one on one?
I think he had both feet in the middle of the bed. Like he shot me, killed me, and he took his own life. That's what it looked like to me. He must have thought, okay, I shot and killed my wife, so I'm going to take myself out.
It all sounded so plausible at first, but now, listen closely. As the interview wraps up, Janelle motions for the detective to hug her.
Yeah, I can't hug you right now, okay? I'm sorry.
My partner and I left the trauma room, and I turned to him and I said, that was my aha moment. She's trying to sell me this story.
Everything went black, and I thought that I had died.
Janelle claims her estranged husband Greg, who family members call an expert marksman, shot at her 3 times before putting the gun to his own head.
Did you believe Janelle's story that he tried to kill her?
Not for a second.
Greg's daughter Lily wonders, how could her sharpshooter dad have delivered only a single non-life-threatening flesh wound to Janelle's bicep?
Not that he would have tried to kill her, but he was a very good shot. He would not have missed if he had tried to kill her.
And that's the first thing that Kalamazoo County Sheriff's Detective Warren Meisner thought too.
I found it strange that 2 feet from each other, he missed her every time.
Strange things do happen during a fight to the death. Janelle told Sergeant Meisner after the bullet hit her, she fell back, banged her head on the floor, and passed out. Just one problem.
If she passed out and she was bleeding, where was her pool of blood?
There was no injury to the back of her head. If someone falls back and hits their head hard enough that they pass out, there's going to be some evidence of that. And she had 0.
That makes investigators suspicious, so they call in the CSI team. Sergeant Jim Dunlop and the crime lab technicians enter the so-called gun room armed with the tools of their trade: protractors, lasers. and a secret spray.
As I walked into the room, the first thing that I noted is that Greg had sustained a fatal gunshot wound to the head. Greg Bohr was right-handed, and the entrance wound in this case is on the left side of his face. He could not have used his right hand. It's physically impossible.
And the scientific facts are about to put a hole in Janelle's story.
I noticed a lot of stippling on Greg's face. And what stippling is that when a firearm is discharged, it's not just the bullet or the projectile that comes out from the muzzle. There's also a tremendous amount of hot gas and burning and unburned gunpowder. We generally then look at the pattern of the stippling and see how tight or how loose it is and use that to make a determination study as to how far away the muzzle was from the target.
And how far away did it appear to be?
We determined that the muzzle could not have been closer than 15 inches, could not have been further away than 21 inches.
So somewhere around here?
Around 1.5 feet. We came up with 18 inches.
Dunlop demonstrates his theory, showing us actual gunpowder stippling on controlled test panels. So you're saying he was shot at what? At 18?
Right here, about 18 inches.
So, okay, so 1.5 feet, right? Which means if this is my head, there's no way I can get my head, right?
Absolutely. Couldn't have shot himself with his right hand.
But remember that interview Janelle gave from her hospital bed?
Like he shot me, killed me, and he took his own life. That's what it looked like to me.
Now listen closely. She says she found him in bed with the gun in his right hand.
So as he's lying back on the bed, where is the gun?
It was laying in his hand.
And which one was that?
I think it was in his right hand.
If he were to use his left hand, he cannot use a conventional grip on that pistol and still accommodate that angle and get 18 inches away.
And at the same time facing down on the bed.
Yeah, he was laying on the bed with his head on a pillow.
And Dunlop says there's another impossibility with Janelle's story. Although Greg was in the bed, they found the pistol Janelle claims Greg shot himself with several feet away from his body.
And if he had shot himself, it couldn't possibly be that far away from him.
Correct.
It'd be like bam and toss it.
Correct. She admitted to moving it or knocking it onto the floor. But again, she indicated it was in his right hand. We know that's a physical impossibility. He couldn't have shot himself with his right hand.
So now the crime lab measures the angles of the trajectories of the bullets to determine if Janelle is telling the truth.
By doing what we call bullet backtracking, we're actually able to determine the exact flight path of 2 of the different bullets that were fired of the 4. The first thing we determined was that the shot that killed Greg was a single gunshot wound from the .40 caliber pistol that entered the left side of his face. That bullet stayed in his head. The second round, that bullet clipped a piece of the door before going into the east wall. That bullet in the doorway spread a tremendous number of the particles from that door all throughout the room. But when we were looking at Greg Bohr, what we found is these particles were on his eyelashes, they were on his neck, they were on his arm, they were in his hair, and that these particles were sitting on top of the coagulated blood, which means that it had to have happened after Greg was shot and killed.
And this is how they tested. Using a special spray to highlight the laser beam.
We use a laser emitter to show the flight path of the bullet. We just use a aerosolized dust, and we're able to see exactly what the flight path of that bullet was.
So, based on your investigation, he couldn't have shot himself.
Correct. Greg Bohr didn't shoot anybody that day.
And another inconsistency, they found trace amounts of GSR gunshot residue on both Janelle's and Greg's hands. And if he had shot himself, there would be way more than just trace amounts on his hands.
Janelle and Greg both had approximately the same amount of gunshot residue on their hands. Maybe somewhere between 10 and 30 particles.
So what do you make of that?
Well, certainly when you look at the fact that they both have basically no GSR on them, that one of the two had the opportunity to wash up, to try to clean the evidence away. It wasn't Greg Bohr. Greg Bohr's laying dead on the bed. He didn't wash his hands or anything. she forgot that we're going to check his hands too.
Which tells you what?
That Janelle was the shooter.
The angles are all adding up. And they're putting a box around Janelle Bohr and her claim that her husband Greg shot her before turning the gun on himself. Crime Lab Sergeant Jim Dunlop believes Janelle, a U.S. mail clerk, went postal on her husband.
She shot him.
Right.
Dunlop says the laser beams showing the trajectories of the bullets prove that Janelle shot and killed Greg while he was asleep, and then she began the big cover-up.
After she had shot Greg, she then began doing things to stage the crime scene in order to sell it as this murder-suicide attempt.
Doing things like actually shooting herself in the arm to make it look like she was the intended target.
So she basically had to shoot up the room to make it look like there was like a shootout between a husband and a wife on Valentine's Day.
Correct. And fortunately for us, she had no idea on how we investigate shooting scenes or our ability to figure out who is standing in which position and able to really backtrack the flight path of these bullets. I'm not surprised anymore. I've been doing this for 24 years, and it would certainly be harder if they did their homework and knew what it was that we were going to be looking for.
As Detective Warren Meisner investigates further, he tracks down Janelle's ex-husband, who he says makes a stunning revelation.
He told me how he was arrested for domestic. She had claimed that he told the police, the responding officers, that he had assaulted her. And he said, no, that was never the case. He said that she had hit herself so hard in the face that she had done some type of facial damage to an eye orbital. Anyone willing to go to that measure certainly is capable of shooting themselves in the arm.
And Meisner says investigators found no evidence supporting Janelle's claims that Greg had ever abused her or their young son, Jason.
I was certainly very confident as far as the amount of evidence that we had to clearly demonstrate her guilt.
When it's time to confront Janelle, deputies bring her into the station for questioning.
How's your arm?
And once the interrogation gets underway, Janelle drops a bombshell.
I've been instructed by my attorney not to say anything about him present.
I thought your attorney was a girl.
That was my divorce attorney, and she referred me to another attorney.
And who is that? What's his name?
Randall Levine.
Oh, so you actually retained Randy? I'm not asking questions, I'll just tell you a few things. I'll tell you that I think it's highly suspicious to me that you would contact a criminal attorney when your husband tried to kill you and killed himself.
Is that what he is?
Yes, he is. Randy Levine is a prominent criminal defense attorney in Kalamazoo.
What did you go to Randy for?
He just asked me what happened.
I read most of Detective Meisner's interview with you, okay? And then I've also reviewed the forensic evidence. And I can tell you that it is not lining up. Okay? I'm going to consider you a suspect at this point in this. Okay?
Despite her attorney not being present, Janelle continues talking.
I'd like to talk with you, just don't feel good enough to talk right now. I feel like I'm ready to pass out.
And then acts like she's the walking dead.
So I feel like it's almost like I'm not here. It's almost like, am I really dead? You know, did he kill me? Am I dead? That's what I feel like.
Janelle then bizarrely announces her dinner plans.
We're ordering pizza tonight.
The only pepperoni Janelle will be scarfing down will be behind bars. She's arrested and charged with murder and felony firearm use, a possible life sentence if she's convicted.
You understand that's the charge and the possible penalty is a second count?
I do understand.
Prosecutors believe the motive was Janelle's unwillingness to share custody of their then 4-year-old child, Jason. At Janelle's arraignment, attorney Randy Levine tries to get her released without posting a bail bond.
She hasn't fled, nor does she intend to flee. So I think flight is not a factor that would require there be no bond.
She's a fine woman.
and a good employee of the post office. She's looking forward to the evidence that will be presented in the courtroom.
But that court date will never happen. In a shocking development, Janelle cuts a deal, pleading guilty to second-degree murder.
When we found out that the other side might be amenable to a plea to second-degree murder, we went to the victim's family and talked about that and ultimately decided that that was the best way to resolve the case for everyone.
Janelle's case now goes straight to the sentencing phase, and fireworks are about to explode in the courtroom.
You had no right to kill my son.
Janelle, in an orange jumpsuit and shackles, listens as Greg's parents give their victim's impact statement.
He was too kind to be saved from a monster like you.
He was a good soul with many friends. He succeeded time and time again to meet the challenges of life. Fatherhood, a family man.
Janelle negotiated her sentence in the plea bargain, 17 to 19 years in state prison.
What was the most important thing you needed to say to her?
That I thought she was a monster, and I also wanted the public to understand there are still people who believe her that my son was abusive, and he was not in any way abusive, ever.
I have a hard time referring to that person as a human being.
This is a family torn apart forever when rage killed romance on Valentine's Day.
I don't understand how you can do that, especially to someone that has not done you any wrong. You can't cope with that, so you cope with it by killing him, killing my brother.
Little Jason now faces growing up without his parents, his killer mom in prison, his beloved father dead and buried. And as for Greg's older daughter, Lily, she will forever cherish her final conversation with her dad.
When was the last time you saw him?
The night before.
What was your exchange like?
He told me he loved me and good night because he was headed off to work.
You feel the hole is bigger when you're with your family and he's not there?
Yes, there's such a big part of us missing now. Just another good person that's not in this world anymore.
One final note on this story, Janelle and Greg's young son, who's now 5 years old, has since been adopted by Greg's brother Chad and his wife.
Does he understand that his mother killed his father?
Yes.
He does?
He does now. It was recently explained to him by his therapist, his counselor, and we did not tell him anything about it until his counselor said it was time. As adults, this has been extremely hard for us to process. I can only imagine what it might be like for a 5-year-old.
Janelle is set to get out of prison when that son is 22 years old.